Hello and welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and back here it's his turn, as he was saying. You get it used to it on the calendar, your rotation.
Yep.
Chris Hendricks is back, state representative, representing New Bedford. Thank you for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me. My pleasure to be here.
Lots going on right now for you guys.
A ton, yeah.
On Beacon Hill. It's that time of year too. I mean, the budget process is moving along. The House should be coming out with their version of the spending bill. I know usually in early April-ish, if you will. I know could give it a week or two either way. But in legislation you guys are dealing with, as you said to me off camera, you just, on your committee with the vice chair, you just passed a pretty important piece of legislation for folks. It means funding for communities.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, you mentioned the budget. That will be coming up next month. The revenue picture doesn't look as bright and sunny as it once did for the last few years. So there's going to be some challenges and some cuts along the way, particularly with earmarks. At my stage in the House, I was just starting to get some good funding from my earmarks, and so that's kind of unfortunate. But and as you know, with the 9C cuts that the governor did
in January
for this fiscal year. So the budget is going to be challenging this year, but certainly we're prepared to do what we need to do. The federal stimulus committee work that you mentioned, this past week we passed a bill that would take the stabilization fund interest and create its own separate fund to allow the state to pursue federal matching grants. So there's three federal bills that came out in the last few years. You have the infrastructure bill, you have the CHIPS Act, and you have the Inflation Reduction Act. You consider all those three bills, there's an estimated about $17 billion that we could acquire here alone for the state of Massachusetts. So using this money and leveraging it in such a way, I think is smart. As I told you, I'm the vice chair of that committee, and we heard testimony, and obviously we scrutinized the bill, and we tweaked some of the text that the Senate had put in prior to the hearing. But we voted on it this week. It passed, and so it was the governor's bill originally. It's basically her effort, and so the Senate passed their version. We passed ours this week, and so hopefully in a couple weeks, month or so, we'll be voting on something, a final product.
You haven't decided, and it's not you, but the money hasn't been, in a sense, earmarked is the only word I can think of, to certain particular projects right now, has it?
It's only, well, in a way it has. Okay. So it's only federal matching grants, to pursue federal matching grants within those three laws,
correct.
The three federal programs I mentioned. It's also for post-retirement benefits as well, and any debts or liabilities we have. Now, the Secretary of Administration and Finance would have the authority, obviously given the legislator notice, 30 days notice on what he's going to spend that, or she's going to spend that money on. But they are allowed to spending on federal matching grants for those three that I mentioned, as well as post-retirement liabilities for government, for state workers that
and the pension system goes up. I mean, it does.
It doesn't
every
get
year.
any easier to manage.
Correct.
And so this will serve two really important purposes, we think, and put us. And it's smart. You always hear about people wishing that we'd run the state and government like a business. This is essentially doing just that. And so I think it'll put us in a strong position, especially with all the money that could be available. I mean, $17 billion is a lot of money.
And you're talking the interest too.
This is the interest from the stabilization fund that will be. And obviously, in the law is that that's conditional. If revenues are down, we don't take any money out of the stabilization fund interest. If the stabilization fund amount was less than it was the previous year, then no interest can get used. So there are parameters, and it has to be it has to be stable, no pun intended, for us to use that interest money for federal matching.
And
grants.
I know it seems that the governor right now doesn't have an interest in using the stabilization fund right now. That seems to be the key, is we want to keep that generally where it is.
It's at $8 billion right now,
right,
which I think is probably the biggest out of any state in the union. And I mean, at one point, several years ago, it was down to 1.5, I think, or something like that.
It was low.
And I remember we were getting a lot of heat prior to the pandemic of going into the stabilization fund for certain things. And I said, well, we might need that money, So thank God we didn't, before the pandemic. So it's at $8 billion now. We've funded it along the way with certain bills. And so I think we're in a really good position to really leverage that money to build, simple as that.
Talk about, as you talked about the budget, the revenues being down. Although the definition of down, it's down from projections, it's not down from, as it was explained to me, the projections are down from what they thought it would be, but it's still above where it should be, I guess.
Yeah. It doesn't look good. I don't know, I can't say where exactly it is today as we sit here, but it's expected that it's going to be significantly less.
But is there a reason why, do you know?
No. I mean, you'd have to ask an economist.
It just seems that that's...
But I think there was a lot of money going around for the pandemic, and that put a lot of employers, put a lot of people who have a lot of employees, kept them afloat, and it kept them alive. And I think a lot of once you have the supply chain issues, inflation, interest rates skyrocketing, that kind of affected things a little bit. So the short-term picture with all the money that was going around, I think, helped. But I think, long-term it presented some challenges, which is what we're dealing with now.
Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about obviously funding for schools, communities, so many things, and obviously one of the things is housing right now, which is a huge issue. The migrant housing issue that's going on,
huge,
and it seems to be growing because it's going to cost $1 billion this year, according to what I saw. Estimates are $1 billion ultimately this year, and another $1 billion next year. And when you're talking about the budget, that's $1 billion you weren't even expecting to spend.
Yeah, it's a lot of dough. And it's pretty scary when you hear the outlook of how much we're going to be needing to spend next year, another $1 billion, so that's $2 billion total.
And again, you weren't expecting that in your...
no one was expecting that.
Correct, in the budget.
Right. No one was expecting that this last year, never mind, especially last year. So we put an additional $250 million already.
And that's a stopgap.
And that's, yes.
That was just only for a couple months, really.
Correct, and that's already
gone,
and we already need close to $900 or $700 million now for this year. So it's been a struggle. We, as you know, we appropriated $50 million specifically for the governor to create an overflow shelter, wherever she wants, wherever she chooses.
I think there's one going up in Boston.
Greater Boston area. I think they've decided in the Seaport, which I think is a great place to put it.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of room, there's plenty of space, and honestly, if you don't like it, it's hard for the people living on the Seaport. It's hard to get in their corner sometimes. But anyway, I think that's a great place for that location. And so the governor's saying that we're going to need more money, and I think, to me, the question is this sustainable? We can't be spending money like this. This is ridiculous.
Well, the House Speaker came out and said we can't keep doing it.
Right, and that's the position of the House, thank God, because that's the way I feel personally. And so if we put more money on it, that's unsustainable, right? So what do you do next? You change the function of the system. You change the substance of it. So there have been ideas to change the shelter process in the state. Substantively,
they've been looking at
wait times, making sure people, if you haven't been here for 6 months, you're not allowed.
Well, that measure failed. That attempt, I guess, failed.
Yeah, the Republicans were
6 months. You had to live in the state for 6 months before you could apply for the shelter program.
Also a time duration, a time limit that you could be on.
Correct.
In the emergency shelter. So I think it's smart to look at a couple of those tweaks to the system because, like I said, it's unsustainable. And it's great that we have a policy that, if you come here and you need shelter, we're going to do whatever it takes to shelter you. That's a great policy.
Massachusetts is the only one that has it.
Right. We should have the back of our residents, of our people living here. We should have the back of everyone in our state. But just like any public policy thing, it has to be sustainable. And so if it's not sustainable, then I think changes to the system have to be made. And I hope in this budget that you'll see some changes in the sheltering system.
It was said that because I know that the governor in, I believe, December, she filed the bill, or she capped the families in the program at 7,500. And right now, as of last week, I know she reported to the legislature that half of those 7,500 are migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers.
Yeah.
So half of the population that's in the shelters right now are those folks.
Yeah. So that's the whole meat and potatoes of this issue is the migrants.
Do you have an idea what would you like to see? Because on the one hand, I understand the numbers crunch. On the other hand, isn't there a sort of our humanity sort of?
Well, of course.
You know?
Of course, you don't want people living out in the street. And as a policymaker, as an elected official, I don't want to have people in my district living on the street or in the library or downtown. We don't have an airport, but if we did, they'd probably be there in my district, that is. And I don't think there's any at the New Bedford airport.
Well, that's why they put that right to shelter in place too. Is the governor at the time was saying we don't want people living in Logan
right. It
Airport
prioritizes us to make sure there aren't people living on the street. Essentially, what that policy is. And so, what I would like to see is us fund what needs to be funded. As a short-term fix, either in the supplemental budget or in the upcoming fiscal year budget, and tweaks to the Massachusetts system, if needed, like we talked about. And if you take those two things, and we have legislation on the federal level, this problem could get solved.
And that's what the House Speaker was saying. The House Speaker said that the fact that bill didn't pass.
The reason why we are in this problem is because the federal government cannot get its act together. We talked about this before we got on air, that there was a bill down there that would have increased border security. It would have limited border crossings. It would have shut down the border if certain criteria gets met. It would have been billions to the state in reimbursements for the exact thing we're spending money on. The fact that this bill was killed is deplorable. In how Donald Trump can just make a phone call and say, "Screw the country. I want to take credit for it. If I win, which he probably won't." I'm getting fired up now, Jim. But and so it's just real sad that they had something on the books that everyone agreed to, but one guy down in Florida didn't like it. So everyone just went back in their shell and did what they were told, and it's pretty sad and despicable. And I think that two senators should have voted for that bill. Even though, like you said, at that time, by the time the vote came to the Senate, they knew it was dead on arrival. But this had tangible things that would have drastically helped Massachusetts, would have drastically helped this issue of migrants living on the street, living in airports, overcrowding our sheltering system. And it's too bad because employers need work as well. And part of that bill would have sped up work authorizations for people who were on the list. And that's really unfortunate.
And it's not even the shelter, the housing issue that you're dealing with, because you're also dealing with mass health. You're also dealing with school systems in New Bedford.
Especially the school systems.
The kids that are going into the schools. There's additional costs that aren't even
noted,
factored into when you're looking at the housing bill that communities have to come up with, AKA the state has to come up and help the communities with those. And it's not just New Bedford or anything, it's every community.
Right, and it's, like you said, it's housing, it's education mostly.
Healthcare.
Healthcare, other things that...
And food, really.
Food, and it's like the pandemic all over again, really, if you boil it down. And so I really, I haven't heard of any other bills on the federal level being looked at, but I don't know. I hope something can get done because we need to be reimbursed by the federal government, because all these folks who are coming here are already, this influx of people, this increase in numbers, these are folks that have already been processed. Okay, so there's nothing, so the federal government already did what they need to do paperwork-wise, document-wise. But they're not providing us with any other resource whatsoever. And that bill would have in writing would have reimbursed the states. Would have been like $1.4 billion we could have been looking at.
Which would, and hence, offset the $1 billion you were just talking about earlier.
In the billions of dollars that are coming down the pike. So, It's really unfortunate. I'm hoping on a state level we can stop the bleeding. I don't want to just keep throwing more money at it. How long are we going to throw taxpayer dollars at this without any, observable change or improvement? So I think we need to substantively look at, tweaking the sheltering law for now, or in cases where it gets overburdened, we have a release valve for things like that.
And New Bedford's always been itself a community of migrants.
Of course.
Welcoming to all migrants.
Yep.
Throughout the years, centuries actually.
Yeah. And the city has been great. And I give the mayor and the city credit for taking Afghan refugees in and saying this is a place where you're welcome. We have,
you look at the work at the Immigrants Assistance Center does.
Right. My God.
It's,
Yep.
renowned.
And we have their back if they come here, and we should. But at the same time, it's a public policy. So if something becomes unsustainable and it's a public policy, it needs to be changed, regardless of where your heart is on it.
I had Gene Fox on, and this is an issue you've been talking about since you started, for crying out loud. We were talking about the commuter rail, and I know it's coming in. She seems confident that this summer is it. They're doing the safety work right now and stuff like that. Just let me give me just your thoughts right now with that, because I know it's something you've been working on for a long time.
Yeah.
Since you've got into office. A lot of communities that you had before the redistricting, serving them. Mm-hmm. Are you comfortable? Are you feeling good right now about it?
About the timeline?
Yeah.
As you know, it was pushed.
Summer.
Months and months and months. It was supposed to be by the end of 2023. I think you might have to roll the tape, but every time I talked about the train, I always told people, don't hang your hat on any deadlines that you're hearing, because it's construction, especially a $4 billion investment is going to come into some hurdles. It's moving along pretty well. So the tracks are pretty much done. The stations are done. All the signage is done. It's right now. It's testing. It's signaling and making in safety.
She said it's safety right now. She said the Taunton station is still being worked. That's the only one that's still being worked.
That's like a very elaborate
It's
station.
a
from
bigger
what
one.
I hear. Yeah.
The Taunton station, but she said safety right now is the big one. They have to test the tracks, test the trains, test the signals.
Yeah. Yep. So that's what they're doing now, and I hope they take their time doing that stuff. Because just think about it. We're going to have a train going through our communities. We've never really had that, on a regular basis. So it's going to be a big change for people. And I think, if we have to push it a few months out, I mean, I've been telling everyone all along, it's it'll be here when it'll be here.
Are you comfortable with the way the MBTA is going right now? I know that obviously they're
not really.
They're saying they need more money.
Yeah.
They certainly have a worker shortage that they're advertising. They're advertising on cable access stations. Please work, and not just. I'm not talking here for the trains. I'm talking Boston, everywhere.
Boston, yep.
But just with their no pun intended, track record, how comfortable are you when you see the train coming, knowing how important it is to, as you said, it hasn't been here in decades, how important it is to this community, this area, of them, providing a successful transportation system?
Yeah, I'm concerned in so much as, you hear a lot of stuff going on with the subways. The subway system in Boston,
which is different. I get it. It's different.
Totally different, but it's the same organization.
That's what I'm saying, right?
It's example of how mismanaged this has become. This new gentleman, Eng, who's the head of the MBTA, I think he's doing pretty well. I think the governor is putting appropriate attention on the MBTA and making sure what's fixed needs to get fixed with more manpower, more money if they need it. But it's been challenging, and some of the headlines coming out of Boston have not been pretty for the MBTA. And that's kind of one of the things we really didn't have to deal with, but now we do.
He's out there.
We're going to be an MBTA community.
He's out there.
He is.
Eng is. He's been out in the communities, and I give him props for that, because it's not an easy job he's got. I don't know what the legislature can do when they're saying they need billions. Everybody needs money.
Yeah.
And
so they've been shutting down lines and for safety reasons and all that. I think they're doing a lot of catch up right now. So I don't know. I don't know what the plan is. But the governor certainly has made it one of her priorities to fix the MBTA, and so whatever help she needs, we'll be here ready to do that on the commuter line.
And it's just, I mean, I think there's an excitement. You would know better than I for New Bedford having it starting soon. Hopefully.
Oh yeah,
and you want to feel comfortable that the people running it's going to go.
Right. Yeah, and they haven't really made that easy to do. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I hope. My hope is that the commuter rail portion of the MBTA isn't, especially the new lines coming into New Bedford to Fall River, aren't as affected as the challenges going up in the city.
It's right in the heart of your district.
I'll have 2 MBTA stations in my district. I'm probably the only rep who could ever say, "Oh yeah, I'm having 2 train stations built in my district, and it'll be coming by the end of the year." So that's really cool, and it's really exciting. But it also presents challenges with housing and the market, and making sure people in New Bedford are utilizing this service as best we can. It's not going to be full ridership right off the bat. It's going to be slow. It's going to be a long-term investment to get people riding these regular schedule. But it's certainly exciting.
Speaking of when you talk about housing for the community, you've got the MBTA Communities Act going on, and you've got some communities. I know New Bedford passed it, I think, a year ago or so.
Yeah,
the
quite
voters.
some time ago. Yeah.
But you've got some communities that are on the route that are supposed to provide zoning for additional housing. That's just one of the things if you want to be a community, and they're balking at it. They're saying, no, we're not going to do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I know they have voted it down. I know that the AG has said she's going to challenge that. Yeah. So it's going to be appealed.
Because it's a law, actually.
It's a law, and I don't know what the exception is, how it's written, if there are any. That obviously they didn't vote it, so they didn't vote for it. So I don't know how that's going to pan out. I think every community has a duty to act here. And if you're one of the communities that say, well, we want to have the train, but we don't want to have, we don't want to put housing up, that's pretty sick. Because that policy was designed specifically for commuters, for people, low income, in and around those train stations. So if they just fling it away and say they don't want to do it, that's to me, it's unacceptable.
And what does it say for like the communities in New Bedford passed it overwhelmingly?
Right. So the law is effectively saying, only the gateway cities will have to do this now. The mayor has been very vocal about surrounding communities in the Greater New Bedford area picking up the slack, and so you could say the same for Milton. I think it was Milton, the community that did that. You could say the same for them, and so it's just really sad. I'm hoping that that works out in the courts, that they will have to build multifamily housing in a certain radius from the station. We certainly in New Bedford we have plenty of room, and we're willing, ready, and able to do that.
You just talked about that section of right near the station down on downtown is going to be designated for housing.
Yep, the whole. So you see that walking bridge where that's going to be on the other side of that walking bridge. That neighborhood mostly will be an MBTA community.
And you must be pleased because there are some housing developments coming up in the city. Obviously using state funds. So I mean, some of the legislation and the monies that the state has provided now is sort of panning out, if you will, down here.
It is. Every time you drive down Union Street, you'll see on the corner, I think it's Union and wherever the garden is, that block. You see that across the street from the DeMello building, that huge, it's going to be a 5-story apartment complex. So there's building everywhere. At the bottom of Union Street as well, that's almost done. That should be done within a year. So we're moving. It's been slow, but I think the train will help us move. The train's actually going to help us build housing as well, despite the challenges it's going to bring.
Is there a concern for you about the housing? And I maybe sort of explain to people, because some people say, well, apartments are $2,100 a month right now, but not all the apartments are going to be like that. Some people have to have affordable housing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, in most of that housing that will be built in those MBTA areas will be hopefully affordable. And it should be, and I think there's probably a provision that says it has to be affordable, given that it's the MBTA zone. And there's been a study that was Commonwealth Magazine picked it up, that said that when you build market rate or even luxury housing in a certain area, the surrounding rents get depressed and go down, decrease. So hopefully that's what happens. Obviously, there's no plans to build any luxury housing, but we certainly are building that project on Lower Union's a market rate housing. It's an HDIP. I don't know where their process is along with the HDIP process, but I know it's an HDIP eligible project. So I would like to see more affordability go into the MBTA building, and that's what you're seeing already on one of the buildings, one of the plans. A housing complex set to be built in that zone in downtown already. So there's been some issues with parking because these aren't, there's been some talk about giving variances on parking.
Right.
I think the MBTA law accounts for that. It doesn't, because it's tied into a train station. So
Right.
that's the idea, right? So the neighbors have put some issues, put some complaints in on that, which is understandable.
If you're
where are
gonna-
these people going to park? They're going to. Where am I going to park if you put in, a new housing complex down the street? So there's going to be some challenges along the way, and there's going to be need for meetings and need for people to discuss these things. But I think we're headed in the right direction, ultimately.
Got a couple minutes left here. I just want to give you an opportunity. Just committee work right now, some of the things that you're working on right now for people to know.
Committee work, as you know, I'm the vice chair of the stimulus committee. We just passed this bill. I was very excited to, my first chairmanship, and here I am passing stuff and getting stuff done. So that's really cool. I'm on the judiciary committee as a
Right.
member, and so we worked hard on that gun bill for multiple years now. And so we passed our version in the House, the Senate passed their version, and so now I think last week there was a conference committee assigned to deal with that legislation and get some sort of common ground so we can get something passed.
Well, you see the numbers. Nationally, 60% of people want some sort of gun legislation passed.
Right.
And it just seems, could a state law, if you guys do reach agreement, pass something, could that be struck down though? Could they?
Well, yeah, I mean, hopefully not. We take into consideration what could be challengeable and what isn't. I think there's some stuff in the House bill that I would like to see that I wouldn't mind, and I worked on that bill. But I think some things on the House side go a little too far. That could be challenged, in my opinion. But the Senate version is, in my opinion, a lot more palatable. So I think you're probably going to see something along the lines of a lot we did with the training, and I hope we did with the training course. I think we modernized that. I think that's huge. That's really necessary. So I hope that stays in. I actually made the suggestion of where we put in live firing requirement during the training, at least one round, like a lot of states do, and that made it. So I'm hopeful that will stay in the final version. We could talk all day on what's in it and what shouldn't be in it, but I think at the end of the day we'll agree to something that's palatable for everyone.
Gonna have to leave it there. Lots going on.
Lots going on.
Congrats.
Until next time.
That's a nice job. All right. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you again soon.